Hello everyone, it's Emma Bennett, the Unit Chair. Welcome to Week 3 of ALR103, Introduction to Public Relations. This week we are looking at the vital role of research in public relations. In Week 5, we'll begin to look at the 8-step PR planning process. The first step of the public relations plan is the situation analysis. This includes a background section and research before identifying problems and opportunities. Today, we are looking at why we research in public relations and different types of public relations research. We'll cover some research basics, we'll look at a case study before moving on to some information about the research module available on Cloud Deacon. Finally, a reminder to consult your tutor about your news article for the essay and public relations planning assignment. Let's think about research broadly now. Let's imagine that you are planning a holiday. What research would you undertake? Perhaps you would look at online reviews, you might ask your friends, and then you might decide on a location and think about the best time to travel. You'd think about different accommodation options. You'd perhaps visit TripAdvisor or Airbnb. Research is important in our private lives, but it is absolutely crucial in our work as public relations practitioners. If you're worried that research is new to you, don't be. You're already doing it as a consumer as you plan your holiday, and you have so many tools available to you. A little note first on planning. Let's think about Marsden's race model. The study guide this week talks about public relations research as being either strategic or evaluative. Strategic research is where public relations practitioners diagnose the situation. So research is used to understand situations better. It's used to test assumptions about programs and publics and to help anticipate public relations consequences. Last week, we talked about public relations being based in fact, not fiction. This is where that research takes place. Evaluative research is about measuring your outputs and outcomes. We do evaluative research to determine if a public relations program should continue as it is, if it needs to be revised or perhaps dropped in favour of another program. Importantly, in your final assignment for this unit, we use evaluative research to determine if we have met our objectives. Remember that effective public relations is a process, and we'll use research throughout, but when we look at Marsden's race model here, we begin with research, what is the problem, and we end with evaluation. These are the two main areas where research will influence public relations activities. To effectively communicate, public relations practitioners employ research to aid their judgment, to solve problems, and sometimes these problems are easily solved with research. For example, choosing between different communication alternatives. To ensure that our assumptions are objectively checked. We might believe that a target public has a particular opinion about something, but we can't base our actions on assumptions. We have to check them with facts. We use research to monitor and to forward plan, and we think about benchmarking in your public relations assignment. Our benchmark is where we've begun. We know where we start, we know how far we've come because we know where we've started. We use research to gain an understanding of new issues and to generate hypotheses. In 2010, the global public relations industry agreed on these 7 principles to standardise the measurement and evaluation practices of public relations professionals. So this clearly positions research as an important strategic business tool of communication management. And you'll find more information about the Barcelona Declaration of Research Principles in this week's reading. Research can be used for so many different reasons in public relations, from understanding a target public and how we might best communicate with them, to understanding when we shouldn't communicate at all. Let's revisit one of the case studies from week 1 in relation to research. In week 1, we briefly looked at the Kiss Goodbye to MS campaign. Research here was undertaken prior to the development of the campaign to determine the best way to reach target publics and what they understood about MS, about multiple sclerosis. And this was done in the form of physical focus groups where people attended an office to engage in a discussion, as well as online surveys. Those involved in researching needed to discover the best ways to communicate with this target public, what types of messages they responded to, what they didn't like. They discovered that this particular target public wanted to show their support through simple actions, and that they were also heavy users of social media. And this led to the campaign revolving around supporters wearing red lipstick or something red and sharing via social media. At the end of the campaign, success is measured using a range of tools, from media and social media analysis to focus groups and surveys. So what works well or not so well is taken into account in the development of the campaign for the next year. It is a yearly campaign, so we can then learn from what has happened one year to change your approach in the following year. Here are some questions to ask before you begin researching. What is the problem? What kind of information is needed? And what are the objectives of the research? What are we trying to achieve there? What specific public or publics should be researched? Should we do the research in-house or should we hire a research consultancy? How will this data be analysed, reported or applied? How soon do we need the results and how much will this cost? It's important we have an understanding. Now we're going to go over some research basics here. This is the minimum amount of information you will need to know in order to complete the public relations planning assignment and the quiz successfully. Let's start with primary research. Now this is research that is new and original. It's research that you are conducting yourself. And this could be in the form of interviews, focus groups, surveys and polls. Secondary research, confusingly, is usually undertaken first, before primary research. Secondary research can help to determine gaps in knowledge and information that you can fill with primary research. So if you think about your boss asking you to undertake a new project, where will you go first? You might start with Google, broadly at first, and then you're narrowing your search. Think of it as a funnel, all of this information, and slowly you're putting the pieces together and narrowing your focus. So you're looking at existing information here, from books and articles to websites like the Bureau of Statistics. Think about the difference between qualitative and quantitative research now, and you may be familiar with these terms from your studies of in maths or psychology or a range of other areas. Quantitative data is about numbers. So an example would be 23% of our target public would pay extra for a guaranteed parking space. We can quantify that. Qualitative is about qualities, about opinions, feelings and attitudes. An example, after extensive research, Tourism Australia discovered that Australia is a place people want to put on their life resume and that Australian residents are interested in being part of a tourism campaign. We're talking about feelings and attitudes and opinions there. But let's go into these in a little more detail now. Quantitative research is a technique using precise scientific sampling methods in polls and surveys. The results from a sample of a population allow you to draw a statistical conclusion about a total population or a total public. So the emphasis here is on gathering sufficient quantity of data so that it is a representative sample. In qualitative research, results cannot be summarised by percentages. However, focus groups or in-depth interviews are useful in identifying a range of attitudes and opinions and how those attitudes and opinions are formed. It doesn't rely on quantity for insights. It relies on spontaneous and unbiased responses to obtain a greater depth of information. And it's often then fed into a quantitative program. So in order to develop perhaps a survey that is going to give you the information you need, you might begin with a focus group, and the data that's derived from the focus group will help you form your questions in your survey, and then you can receive some quantitative data. Let's think about demographic and psychographic research now. Demographic information can be obtained from census results. You know, that census that we all have to do once every few years. So you can look at the ABS website linked here to find information about gender, income levels, education levels, ethnic backgrounds, age, household populations, and so on. And this can be useful information in determining how best to communicate with target publics and understanding target publics better. From week 5, as I mentioned, we'll be looking at the 8-step public relations plan. And in the plan, we ask 6 questions to get a better understanding of our target publics through demographic and psychographic information. So you're thinking about lifestyle, cultural values, their social situation, stages of a family life cycle, but also their motivations and attitudes. Let's think about how you might collect some information now. We'll look first at focus groups, interviews and surveys, and media analysis. So focus groups are widely used and they're very structured, usually of about 8 to 12 people sitting in a room discussing the issues. Sometimes a one-way mirror is used to allow filming so that you can also record things like body language, those non-verbal cues. It's often used in copy testing, where participants will view or read or hear material in draft form before it's distributed. Let's think about interviews and surveys now, and obviously there are many different ways that these can be conducted, and depending on what you are trying to find out, who you are communicating with and so on, you'll choose different methods. So first we have mail or email questionnaires, and these are highly controllable, but sometimes it's hard to get the numbers that you need or get the number of responses that you need. Sometimes rewards are used, but this is not always an option. Telephone interviews or questionnaires give you an immediate response, but people are increasingly wary of these types of calls, and you may know this yourself. We have the government do not call register, which perhaps isn't always successful, but a lot of people would prefer not to receive these calls. And while it is actually okay to conduct these types of calls, people are increasingly wary of scams, and that is understandable as these sorts of scams increase. We have arranged personal interviews, and these are a really good way to access a lot of information and a great way to pick up on non-verbal cues. But we can also see the increase of video interviews using Skype. But they are expensive, and a lot of people are reluctant to have an interviewer in their own home, which is understandable. But you also only get people who are going to be at home in certain times, so it may not be representative of your target public. Let's look now at omnibus surveys, and these are cost effective because an omnibus survey is going to have questions on a range of different issues, and then you will buy a limited number of questions in a major survey. So these are usually conducted by leading research companies, and they have a great level of expertise in putting these together. However, they are very large and they are time consuming. Online interviews are easy to personalise via email, but there is that greater sense of being anonymous online. So we don't really know if we're reaching our target public or if the person who is responding to the email is giving us accurate responses about who they are and their situation. And then we have intercept surveys. You may be stopped outside a supermarket or shopping centre, for example, and asked about your opinion on certain things. Now, the positive here is that you get an instant response, but they have to be kept really short. People aren't going to stop and answer a range of in-depth, long questions in that environment. Let's think about about media analysis now, and we can bring social media analysis in here as well. So this is used to assess media and social media perceptions and attitudes towards your organisation. So there's different criteria that's being assessed. For example, perception. Is the public perception positive or negative or neutral? Thinking about different media types, is your organisation often referred to in print but not on television? We're thinking about distribution as well. So this is sometimes undertaken in-house, but it's often undertaken by an external firm, and you may have heard of Media Monitors before, and this is a screenshot of their website. But there are also some other organisations who conduct this type of work, such as Hype Factors or Meltwater News. Sometimes research is used solely for public consumption or to generate publicity and story angles. So, for example, I was working with a research company who did research into why people access information online instead of going to their GP. And this sort of data became interesting in itself. So the actual data was the news. In these cases, journalists often ask to see the whole report and may wish to speak to the researcher. So they might ask, what was the most surprising finding? And this gives them something that's newsworthy, and it's a new angle, which is something that your organisation that you're working on behalf of is always going to be looking for new angles and new ways to generate publicity. We're going to have a quick look now at a case study to explore the ways research was used in Dove's Real Beauty campaign development and to determine its success. And you may be familiar with some of these tactics that have come about as a part of Dove's campaign. In the early 2000s, Dove's PR agency, ALR103, conducted a study of more than 3,000 women in 10 countries to learn about women's priorities and interests. So this is an example of primary research. We can assume that ALR103 conducted secondary research first, and this might have informed them which countries they would focus on for the primary research, for example. In their research, they discovered that only 2% of women interviewed considered themselves beautiful. Dove saw an opportunity not only to increase their consumer base, but to change the conversation about beauty. If we tie this back into your study guide, this is an example of strategic research. Now, there was a risk that advertising, such as the billboard above with the checkboxes, that advertising alone would be seen as shallow and as a marketing ploy. So they created a fund to partner with organisations working with young girls. They created a series of videos, many of which you may be familiar with, and we'll watch one of those as part of this week's lecture. It will be linked separately. And they had interactive components of their website where visitors could make over negative ads to make them more body positive. There's a video that you can watch now, which is embedded separately, and this particular video was shared on social media, which of course can be tracked and analysed using social media metrics. And around the same time, several magazines and online media outlets decided to become more transparent about their use of Photoshop, which can also be measured via media analysis. The campaign is not without its critics. Some experts say that there is a disconnection between these messages and the products that Dove and parent company Unilever are selling, that they are actually capitalising on women's insecurities to sell products. Others say that these are patronising to women and that they're trying to solve a deeply rooted societal problem. So how would Dove measure whether or not the campaign had been successful? They would have conducted evaluative research. So this campaign achieved far more impressions through its viral nature than it did via its paid ads. Using metrics, Dove would have analysed social media to determine opinions about their content. And we can also assume that they copy tested some of these videos with a sample of their target public before releasing them. In order to continue to resonate with its target public, Dove would have researched throughout the campaign, considering the opinions of the target public and how they felt about these tactics and the company and the messages and so on. Interestingly, this case study has been the focus of academic studies into public relations, in advertising, in marketing, in media and communication. So it continues to be researched on a different level, on an academic level as well. When we begin to look at the PR planning process in week 5, we'll also look at objective setting. So what do you think Dove's objectives were here? We measure our success based on objectives. If Dove's objectives revolved around changing the conversation regarding beauty, do you think they succeeded? The next thing I would like you to do is to have a look through the research module that's been put together in conjunction with our liaison librarians. This module has been developed to help you increase your research skills that you will need to draw on throughout your study of public relations. You'll need to be able to locate a news article for the essay and for the PR planning assignment. So once you've located your news article, you'll need to be able to research the issue central to the 2 assignments. In the essay, you'll need to draw from theory to justify your article selection. In the PR plan, you'll need to conduct some secondary research in order to better understand the situation, target publics, and what further research is required. So you can access this module by heading to resources. It's under topic 3 and it's called the library research module. You will need to complete this because some of the questions in the first quiz are based on this module. Hopefully you've all been thinking about the news article that you're going to be using for your essay assignment and subsequent public relations plan. It's important that you get in touch with your tutor to discuss the article to make sure you're on the right track. So what have you found so far and why have you chosen your article? Remember last week we looked at this newspaper article analysis. This could be a starting point for you. Make sure you determine if your article is suitable by answering these questions here. Now, there is nothing for you to upload in week 3 to a discussion area. Instead, I want you to make sure that you go through the research module, the library research module available under topic 3. Next week, we'll be looking at media relations, and this again will help you in your first assignment. Think about the relationship between public relations and the media, or journalists more specifically. Quiz 1 is coming up, so make sure you know when this is available. It is made up of 20 multiple choice questions and it will take 20 minutes of your time. It covers topics 1, 2 and 3. So make sure you're up to date with all of your readings as the questions in the quiz are drawn from the readings, the study guide and the lecture notes.